Hello and welcome to Ephemera. I am fantasy author Katie Brisky.
And I'm editor Jen R. Albert. We hope you're enjoying our theme music courtesy of Alex Waite. Welcome to anybody joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those of you who have visited our virtual home before. For those of you who are new, Ephemera is an award-nominated reading series chaired by Katie and myself.
Pre-COVID, we held events in the Glad Day bookshop, and we are thrilled to circle back with more fiction and camaraderie right here on YouTube. And we'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This land is covered under Treaty 13 and is part of the Dish with One Spoon.
And the land on which I live and work is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas, and is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Additionally, this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Our theme tonight is circles, and indeed, there are so many in our lives. Our Mother Earth herself is a circle. So is our sun, shining so warmly today in Toronto, and our moon. Circles guide us in the round of the seasons, now turning here in the Northern Hemisphere towards the fall equinox, and in the great circle that carries us from birth to death. The circle is balance, as in the medicine wheel. The circle is wholeness and harmony. The circle has no beginning and no end. And so I think we can learn a lot from the circle about being in right relationship. It's no surprise that circles also shape our relations. Among Indigenous colleagues and partners, circles are frequently how gatherings open and close in a good way. Sharing and talking circles hold space for our vulnerabilities, our diverse perspectives, and our innermost selves. And the thing I've learned about such circles over the last few years is they can be formed in our hearts and on screen, as well as physically. In circle, there's no one above or below. There's only all of us together, being together in a good way. But circles are actually very hard to make. As you know, if you've ever drawn one or pulled chairs into place to form one, right relationship doesn't fall into place either. It takes effort, the humility to learn from mistakes, a willingness to be uncomfortable, and a commitment to meaningful, lasting change. As you listen to tonight's fiction and music, I encourage you to reflect on the circles and relationships in your life and how you can use the circle's endless turnings as inspiration to work towards reconciliation. Thank you.
So this is our third to last show.
And is there a specific word for that? Like how penultimate means second to last?
There is actually antepenultimate.
And how about fourth to last?
Pre-antepenultimate.
And fifth?
The theme is circles, not infinities. I think it's
also
time
very good.
Welcome our first reader now with her today. EG Condé is a queer Boricua writer of speculative fiction. Condé is one of the creators of Taino futurism, an emerging artistic genre that imagines a future of Indigenous renewal and decolonization for Burican, Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean world. His short fiction appears in Anthropology and Humanism, If There's Anyone Left, Reckoning, East Review, Tree and Stone, Sword and Sorcery, Solar Punk Magazine, and Fable, an anthology of sci-fi and horror and the supernatural. Hi, sci-fi, horror, and the supernatural. Welcome, EG.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, so time to get started. I'm going to be reading from my novela Sordidez, which is with Stelliform Press, just got published in August, so it's pretty new. And this is a story that's generally about healing, trauma, and transformation, and it's set in Puerto Rico and the Yucatan. Going to be reading from the first chapter called Huracan, Heart of Sky. It begins with a quotation. The most ultimately righteous of all wars is a war with savages. The rude, fierce settler who drives a savage from the land lays all civilized mankind under a debt to him. Theodore Roosevelt, The Winning of the West, 1889 CE. It was after dusk when Teddy came for us. His breath was thick and wet as it swept through the forest. Not even the coquis dared to chirp within there, rummaging in the brush. I can still remember the wails of the trees. As he flayed their barks, as he dismembered them limb for limb. I was huddled with my family when his tongue slithered through cracks in our zinc roof, bored holes in the tarp that we hoped would shield us. Someone screamed when the roof caved in, splintered under the weight of a fallen yabisi. Its pale trunk cracked like bone beneath his invisible fist. Then, Teddy descended, jaws bared, his saliva oozing down on us in wicked rivulets. Hands clasped, we pleaded to our Creator for quick deaths. But death never came. Instead, as if our semis had heard our prayers, Teddy's voice caught in his throat. Silence. It was as if the engine of the cosmos had suddenly shuttered its industry, giving way to quiet entropy. And that's when I remembered what the gobernadora had said on the radio the night before. Her warning not to trust the stillness. No habrá paz en medio de la tormenta. When it was so quiet that I could hear my heart drumming in my ears, I clambered out of the wreckage. My sisters cursed at me for my foolishness, my tonteria, but soon they followed, curious. Where the roof had collapsed, bleached bark and serrated metal parted like the petals of a hideous flower to reveal him, grinning and gordo in the pallid sky. Below, the jungle had withered to a tangle of brown, as if his breath curled with unseen flame. A coconut palm whined and crashed. Its death echoed over the mountains, twisting into something that reminded me of laughter. I lifted my gaze to the sky to search for the face of the Taino deity that legends say takes the shape of a storm, arms curling like serpents to set the clouds into a devastating spiral. Huracan. Teddy was the 20th of 22 names randomly assigned for that year by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, but I like to think that he was named after the Teddy, the American conquistador, the last to lay claim to this little jewel in the Caribbean I call home. How fitting that he should be the one to usher in the end of American dominion here. Perhaps we should be grateful. Some pray that our new masters will be better caretakers of our land, but we Jibaros, we have our doubts. I regret not taking Mandarin at university as we sift through the packages our new rulers airdrop for us. Bags of rice, insulin, antibiotics, distilled water, bioprinted protein powder. Will the Chinese be more sympathetic than their American or Spanish predecessors? They are, after all, not strangers to our suffering. They must remember when their people were sent here as laborers to work in the factories, that last-ditch effort to save Spain's crumbling empire with industry. or when the Americans-Chinese Exclusion Act uprooted thousands from their communities, leaving them few refuges other than our colonial backwater. What an irony that the ones the Spanish and the Americans spat on and called coolies ended up as our new landlords. The US sold us off like a bad investment, but on the radio, they said that the Americans were on the verge of bankruptcy, that the Chinese seized Puerto Rico as collateral for unpaid debts, the price for defaulting on too many climate loans. I applaud the Chinese for banking on our collective apathy to curb emissions to win out in the end. With this International Climate Bank, they hold all the cards now, financing natural disaster recovery efforts, cementing their global influence by sowing debt. Before Teddy, the talking heads said that their president should just get it over with and declare himself emperor. Emperor of what, I wonder? After COVID-19, androvirus, the gigafires and heat domes, the Thwaites ice shelf, and Teddy, who wants to rule a world that is half underwater and half scorched to a dust bowl? After Teddy, I had to teach myself not to care about what happens beyond my shores, even if that is what I spent my life preparing to do. I ignore what I hear about the Yucatan, parched by chemical weapons into a desert by the madman elected to care for it. I ignore accounts of drones slaughtering civilians branded as apostates in Siberia for opposing the Tsarina's theocratic regime. I ignore the latest updates on this Sino-American Cold War with many fronts fought by many proxies. It feels silly. My dream of being a journalist, that noble reporter who covered these last days of civilization. Teddy had other plans for me. So now I'm here in the mountains, weaving solar nets with my sisters. It's like when I used to braid your hair, Bero, my little sister Juisa says, showing me how to entwine kapak fibers, strands of blue tarp, copper filaments, bulbs, and glittering fragments of solar panels. She hands me a basket of materials. Her dimples are little caverns that deepen with delight. Juisa, ever the optimist. I set the basket on top of a ladder and begin to thread a mesh of fibers through the boughs of a gnarled fig tree. Remember when I did your hair for your quinceañera? Anacaona bursts into laughter behind me, my elder twin, the serious one. Even she cracks at the memory. How could anyone forget? Our mother was running late that day, like always, deciding that the 15 kilos of arroz con gandules she had prepared wouldn't be enough to feed the dozen people she was expecting. So she went to the market at the last minute for more pork, plantains, breadfruit, and God knows what else. Anacaona, our mother's shadow, was recruited for the shopping trip, leaving Luisa and I behind. So what was I to do? The princesa needed to be ready for her big moment. So I did what I could, which admittedly was far from adequate. I'll never forget Mommy's screams of disgust upon her return, how she wrenched the comb from my hands as if it were a murder weapon. What can I say? The arcane arts of the feminine have always eluded me. On second thought, maybe you can help Daguao with the breakers, Luisa says gently, her black curls falling over her face as she peers down at me from a rooftop. It's coming along. Anacaona gestures toward the forest, eyes alight with pride as she repositions the ladder. I helped Daguao with the labyrinth of switches and breakers he built behind the cancha, the ball court that has become our unofficial town square. He's another genius like Luisa, which explains why they've been best friends as they could crawl. I remove a rusted screw and grab a cable to attach to the open switch when I catch an expression of alarm in Daguao's green eyes. Not that, he signs, the pads of his index and middle fingers clamping to that of his thumb. I make a circle with my fist over my heart to reply, sorry. Daguao passes me the end of another cable wrapped around his shoulder. I socket it into place and retighten the screws. Daguao grins with approval, tucking his black hair into an elastic tie. In his delicate smile lines and sharp cheekbones, I can see the ghost of his father's face. An artisan and mechanic from Ponce who moved to our mountains to build a new life with others who could communicate in his language. Teddy took too many of us. When you're raised in the campo, hearing or not. You learn to sign if you want to understand what's going on. In primary school, we learned a bit of ASL, but our neighbors speak a regional dialect of their own. Communication is not the most straightforward up here, but you get used to it. You have to. We're hearing people regularly switch from Spanish to English to Spanglish to ASL and LSPR and ASL PR-ish, and that resurrected island Arawak that you youth learn at summer camp. Dagwal riffles through a shipping container filled with useful scrap, searching for solar batteries to attach to his contraption. I follow him with discarded cable shielding and copper thread and drop them into bins that he has meticulously labeled to keep our salvage organized. In the months since Teddy, we became scavengers to survive. They don't tell you that the aftermath of the storm is the worst part. They don't tell you about the despairing nights, praying for help that never comes, about digging mass graves to bury the dead under the smog-choked skies of diesel generators. In the end, we endured as we always have. Like the petroglyphs of frogs and birds etched in boulders along our rivers, we endured. From the debris of our towns, we created this Yukayeke, this mountain sanctuary that has served many generations of our ancestors, going back to those daring Taino and Yoruba that settled here to escape the reach of the Spanish crown that enslaved them. But with our kerosene supply dwindling, we had to find a new way to keep the lights on. Even though Teddy's Category 6 winds shattered most of the island's solar panels, Juisa schemed a way to remake the debris into something that might save us. For all that our isla lacks, we have sunshine in abundance. So we weave the reflective shards of solar panels with kapak fibers from our sacred saiba trees. We stitch circuits into a meshwork that we drape over the branches. We make solar microgrids with life's stringy filaments. We call them our nasa, an Arawak word for the nets that our ancestors used to catch fish in our seas and rivers when they were still teeming with life. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And I have to say, I love all the different takes that we get on our themes. And in that piece, it was just so rich. And I saw so many circles between the huracan, the societal, historical circles, even the circle signing sorry over the heart. Like that was just such a richly textured take on our theme. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Pick up the book. I picked up my copy at ReaderCon. It's got a star review right here on the cover. Stiliform Press is fantastic. So highly recommend you pick up their stuff. Thanks so much for being with us.
And I would like to say pro-pre-anti-penultimate.
What?
The word for something fifth to last is pro-pre-anti-penultimate. You're looking for a Scrabble word.
Okay, that would be hard to do in Scrabble, I think. I wonder if the audience can circle back to their memory of our theme in our pro-pre-anti-penultimate ephemera.
You'll have to do map and memory searching or Google.
Or Google searching, Facebook.
2 months ago
things are still up.
Because whoever expected math at a reading series.
Well, circles are mathy.
This is true enough.
Stuff.
Some sort of geometry. But it is my pleasure to introduce our next guest. Christina Vasilevski is a writer, editor, and novice drum player living in Pickering, Ontario. When she's not working, gardening, or fussing over her 2 very spoiled cats, she is teaching herself how to play the Rav Bast, a steel drum similar to a handpan. I'm going to be doing a little screen sharing here. Oh, I'm going to stop my video, going to share sound, and we're gonna go.
Hi, I'm Christina. Thanks for listening tonight. Thank you very much.
Ah, that was so cool. And not only was it an excellent visual representation of our theme, don't think I didn't notice the very on-theme circular necklace. That was a delightful bonus in addition to the beautifully harmonious music.
That was excellent. So beautiful.
Thank you, Christina, and much applause. And I'm curious to know, for our little ephemera trivia, what was that theme?
Our pre-anti-penultimate theme was heart. Seems very fitting, actually.
Circles always bring us back to what is important. And speaking of, I wonder if there's a word for sixth first to last?
There isn't. There's definitely not.
Well, then maybe the audience should invent one and tell us what it is in the chat. And I should introduce our next reader. Josh Gauthier is a Maine-based writer and playwright. He earned an MFA in popular fiction from the Stone Coast Creative Writing Program. During the day, Josh works as a librarian. His work has previously appeared in markets such as Non-Binary Review, the No Sleep Podcast, and the Stone Coast Review. His full-length play of Murder and Madness debuted at Footlights Theatre in 2019, and his first novel, Land of Outcasts, released in 2021. You can find him online at linktree/JG_writer, and we are so pleased to welcome him to Ephemera tonight. Hi, Josh.
Hello. It is a pleasure to be here with Ephemera and such a talented set of writers. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I will dive right in. I'm reading a couple selections from said novel, Land of Outcasts, which is a fantasy adventure story. And I'm starting a couple chapters in, so just a very brief setup. Eli is a wandering mercenary gunslinger, and his traveling partner is Sasha, who is a battle unicorn. They are on the run from some powerful people they have made upset. They are hiding out in a town on the edge of an expansive swamp, and they have been approached by a woman named Marion with a potential job that she would like to hire them for. And so this kicks off the morning after Marion and Eli have first met. Eli emerged from the tavern into a truly remarkably lovely morning. The early light was a haze of green, already marked by a thickness in the air and the buzzing of bloodthirsty insects. His clothes had been damp from the moment he dressed, and now they grew heavy, clinging to his body as he walked down the street to the stable. "Good morning." Sasha turned to glare at him and said nothing. Eli saw the stable hand in the corner, clutching a bucket to his chest and staring at Sasha through eyes wide with exhausted fear. A broken shelf lay on the ground, and a water barrel had been overturned, but the boy appeared unharmed and the stable otherwise undamaged. "Breakfast is being prepared," he said by way of greeting. It was always best to start with food when it came to Sasha. She held her glare for another moment before shoving past Eli and heading for the tavern. He winked at the stable hand and tossed the lad a silver piece. He made no move to catch it, and the coin landed on the boy's chest. "Buck up," Eli told him. "It's over now." Sasha was still scowling, her ears back and her jaw clenched, when Eli caught up with her. "What's got you in such a mood?" Her eyes flashed. Bugs, monsters, stink, quivering children, take your pick. Eli said, Sasha cut him off. You slept in a private room, so save it. Get me some breakfast and maybe I'll forgive you. He didn't bother pointing out that his private room was smaller than Sasha's stable and also inhabited by large insects. Marion was waiting for them at a tall table on the far side of the tavern. She inclined her head as Eli started towards her, but Sasha stopped in the doorway. "What have you gotten us into now?" "A job," Eli said. "That's what we wanted, right?" "I want to go home," Sasha answered, "but as that doesn't seem likely." She followed him to the table, and the large bowl of marsh grass is set out for her. Sasha sniffed at the grass while Eli made introductions. She sampled a bite, and Eli watched her chew it cautiously before taking another with greater enthusiasm. "It's sweetgrass," Marion explained. "I hope you like it." Sasha looked at the woman with a touch more interest. "I didn't expect to find anything sweet here." "It's just a matter of knowing where to look." Sasha finished the contents of her bowl, which Jalen immediately replenished before slipping away again, while Eli and Marion ate cutlets of some sort of spiny fish alongside oily slices of a fruit with a tart but not unpleasant flavor. Sasha waited until they were finished before fixing her eye on Eli again. "Now, what stupidity are we planning?" "Sasha?" He glanced at Marion. Don't Sasha me today, Eli. I'm tired, I'm grumpy, and trekking off into the green has an inherent stupidity to it, which I trust our employer knows, or we shouldn't be working for her to begin with. So stop being my mother and tell me what we're planning. Well put, said Marion. Well put. Eli wasn't used to being outnumbered. Well, he was, but only in more violent situations, and then he always had Sasha to back him up. In this case, he simply shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Very well. If Marion could handle Sasha's bluntness, perhaps they could all get along. Marion began. 20 years ago, my father was banished from Harmon's Folly. Eli coughed and sat up straight. Sorry, did you say 20 years? Sasha flashed a smirk his way as his confidence faltered. Perhaps he should have asked just a couple more questions the night before. Yes. Do you expect him to still be... Eli stopped himself from saying alive. In the area? Recently, a bounty hunter came through town. He spoke of a man deep in the green, a man whose description matches that of my father. I've never dared venture as far as this man described, hence the reason I don't want to go alone. In truth, the green was the only real complication Eli foresaw, other than the very real concern that Marion's father may be long gone or dead. We get the rest of our payment regardless of the outcome? Rest of our payment, asked Sasha. Have you already accepted? Marion offered us a starting payment, and we're working out the details of the job now. Don't act as though I'm keeping secrets. Then stop keeping secrets, Sasha retorted. Marion held her smile in check as she watched the exchange. How long have you two been together? About 6 years now, Eli said. 6 months, 3 days, 6 years, 3 months, and 17 days, Sasha clarified, though sometimes it feels like much longer. Marion popped a piece of fruit into her mouth, skin and all. To answer your question, yes, I will pay based on the length of time you travel with me, regardless of the outcome. The only other things I ask are that we leave within the hour and you tell no one what we are doing. Eli crossed his arms. Why the secrecy? You've met the overseer? Eli nodded. She is the one who banished my father. She would not take kindly to my seeking him. Which raises another question, said Sasha. Why was he banished in the first place? The overseer accused him of committing crimes with magic. It was spiteful slander, but she holds power enough that no one challenged her. If I find my father, perhaps I can find a way to bring him home. Eli turned toward Sasha. What do you think? Oh, now you want my opinion. You've basically committed us already, and death by insect swarm is as good a fate as any. It was a more willing response than he had hoped for, not that Sasha's acceptance had ever really been in question. She would follow him anywhere, complaining the entire time, certainly, but she'd always be at his back. That settles it, Eli said. We'll need time to gather supplies, but we can set out as soon as that is handled. The supplies are gathered already, Marion said. I've been preparing for a while now so that I'd be ready when the opportunity arose. Unless either of you requires something specific, everything should be in order for us to depart. Marion nodded toward the pistols half concealed beneath Eli's jacket. You'll want different weapons. Black powder doesn't last long here. That won't be a problem. He wasn't ready to tell Marion more than he needed to about the unique nature of his weapons. A giant could sneeze on them and they would still work. That was as good a test as any, though Eli would have avoided that particular test had he been given the choice. Marion raised an eyebrow in question, but didn't push the issue. So be it. We should avoid leaving together. Go to the general store and give my name. They're expecting you and will outfit you with all the supplies you need. Everything is already paid for, and you'll attract less suspicion than I would. Follow the land bridge north of the settlement until you come to the giant's tree. I'll be waiting for you there. With that, she rose and started toward the door. The giant's tree? Eli asked. Marion turned back. You'll know it when you see it. And then she was gone. Eli found Sasha watching him with disapproval. What? Is this going to be like that time we took a contract from the Grey Lady of Ironkeep? Eli smirked. The contract that she paid us incredibly well for? Sasha narrowed her eye at him. The contract that involved us both being taken captive and me getting shot. Twice. You make it sound worse than it was. Easy to say when you weren't the one that got shot. I had to fight that brute, though. What did he call himself again? The Anvil. Terrible name. But that doesn't mean anything. He went down after a single blow to the head. I got injured, Eli pointed out. You took a flesh wound to the hand, Sasha corrected. You didn't ask enough questions then, and it got us into trouble. This feels an awful lot like the same thing. You never used to be this complacent. Who's being complacent? Eli dropped a couple coins on the table. What more would you have liked me to ask? Sasha mumbled something he couldn't hear, meaning she didn't have an answer but was too stubborn to admit it. Exactly. I don't like the green either, but this is as good a job as we're likely to find. So let's go out there and do what we're good at. Rush into situations we don't understand, surviving by luck and mad schemes? Eli adjusted his hat. Exactly. I'm going to jump ahead for a much shorter section. They travel into the green and they are staying overnight in a much more rural village before journeying out into the true wilds. It was late when the gathering ended, the novelty of visitors willing to stop and speak clearly holding great appeal. Once the group finally dispersed, Marion was led away to her own quarters, while Eli and Sasha requested to share a bungalow. It's a nice enough place, isn't it? Eli asked as he stripped down for a welcome wash using the small tub of water provided for him. I suppose. Sasha nibbled on the sweet grass someone had piled in the corner. Eli's head was heavy from too much wine, so he poured himself some water from a pitcher. He could feel Sasha watching as he rubbed a cloth over the stinging bites that still covered his arms and back. How do I look? Like a poxy leper fresh from a bar brawl. He figured he shouldn't have expected anything else in answer. His skin was burned from the sun, chafed, dirty, and scabbed with welts, his hair tangled and matted with grime. He watched the wash water turn cloudy with just a few strokes of the rag. But the temporary relief provided by the cool water, the momentary ease of discomfort as he scraped off layers of grime, it was beautiful. Sasha continued eating, throwing occasional glances his way as he dried and dressed in loose clothes fresh from his pack so he could wash his traveling gear. What is it? He finally asked when Sasha's loaded silence carried on too long. I think you know. Do we have to argue about this right now? He asked, keeping his voice low. There wouldn't be an argument if you just agreed with me. So much for rest. Eli stretched and something popped loudly in his back. Which part am I supposed to agree with? We've established that Marion isn't telling us the whole story. We agree that her father may not even be alive. We agree that we're about to walk into unknown dangers for a job we have no personal investment in. We never have a personal investment in our contract, Sasha said. Or at least I don't. We both know you get a little too emotional sometimes. Sasha's look deepened. No, I'm wondering what's happening to you. Me? You're changing, Eli. Walking away from fights, not pressing Marion for information we have a right to know. I'm tired of fighting, yes, but there's something more you're not telling me. There was more. Eli hadn't voiced it to Sasha. He could barely explain it to himself. What was the point in bothering her with his half worries until he knew what he was really trying to say? But if he didn't answer her question, he'd never hear the end of it. I suppose, he told her, I've been wondering if this is really what I'm meant to be doing. What do you mean? I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair. We wander from place to place, taking money from people we don't know to do jobs we don't care about. Then we turn our backs and move on to the next town. No roots, no lasting effect on anyone we meet. You know that's not true. There are families better off because of what you've done. That's why I joined you. It's never only been about the money. You're a good man, Eli. You help people. I'm not certain what I am. Eli tapped on the windowsill. I've spent so much time charting my own course, I've lost touch with almost everyone I ever knew. How do I know I'm making the right choices if I never stay in one place long enough to watch those choices play out? I think, Sasha trailed off, her efforts at empathy looking painful. You're still not good at being sensitive, are you? He said. I'm a trained warrior, Sasha huffed. Talking about feelings isn't normally a requirement. Don't deny that you have feelings. Eli looked for a way to ease some of the weight in their conversation. I saw you with that little girl tonight, big, fierce Sasha getting a hug. I don't know what you're talking about. He crossed the room and pulled Sasha's face close, pressing his forehead to hers just beside her horn. I'll figure out what I'm doing, he promised, and I won't let it endanger either of us while we're out there. You better not. Whatever trouble you get pulled into, it tends to affect me as well. He closed his eyes and felt Sasha's warmth as she leaned into him. I'm glad I have you with me, he murmured against her. Yeah, me too, but that's enough sincerity for one night. They separated. You're right, it's hard to be so close with you smelling the way you do. You really ought to wash or something. Poxy arse, Sasha sprayed a mouthful of water at him. Eli laughed and danced aside. Careful, I just washed. Whatever, go make yourself useful. As the unicorn returned to her sweet grass, Eli stepped outside to request clean water so he could wash Sasha down as well. Thank you.
Got deep at the end. It was like we're having some banter, we're having a snarky battle unicorn, which is my favorite thing ever. And then it was like, whoa, existential. Wonderful. That was so cool.
I love the tone shifts tonight. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, the player. I want that as like an animated series. You can see it.
It would be so much fun to see that
Super
happen.
fun.
Yeah. No, and the playwriting experience and scripting experience for sure. I see it. I'm like manifesting it. And I'm also delighted to hear what the audience came up with as a word for sixth to last.
Yes, Hex Ultimate makes sense. Kari thinks we should just call it Bob. That seems similar to me. I like that.
Yes.
In this case, June, that many months ago. Oh my God, I said it that many months.
I can't.
The BBBBB4.
I barely know what time it is, let alone keeping track of
I have no
months.
idea where this year has gone.
So it sounds like we've circled some really cool words tonight.
Yeah, perhaps circled some feelings about this being the anti-penultimate show also.
Perhaps. And audience, are there shows or themes from the past few years that you circle back to? Tell us in the chat about your feelings. We can have sincerity. It's all good.
Sincerity, feelings. Yes, which of our past themes did you love? And now it is my pleasure to introduce our final reader. Tobi Ogundiran is the author of the critically acclaimed Jackal Jackal, Tales from the Dark and Fantastic, which you may have seen recently in the New York Times. Tobi has been nominated for the the British Science Fiction Association, the Shirley Jackson Ignite and Nomo Awards. His work has appeared in anthologies such as The Book of Witches, edited by Jonathan Strahan, and Africa Risen, edited by Cherie Renee Thomas, Zelda Knight, and Ogonish Hawe Peggy Donald. Tobi's work has appeared in several years' best anthologies. His novella, In the Shadow of the Fall, is out from Tor.com in 2024. That's very exciting. Born and raised in Nigeria, he spent 7 years in Russia where he trained as a physician and now lives and works in the southern US. Welcome, Tobi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I guess I'll just jump straight into it. So the story I'm going to be reading is titled The Lady of the Yellow Painted Library from my collection, which was out in July. It originally appeared in the anthology Africa Risen, and it's now also in my collection. LeVar Burton did a wonderful read of the story on his podcast, like a fully immersive audio narration. So I'm nowhere near the accomplished actor / voice actor LeVar is, but I'm gonna try my best, I guess. So a bit of backstory on the story, I guess. The story is about a traveling salesman who sells rotary phones. So he goes into this library trying to sell some phones to the librarian, and she ends up buying 2 phones from him. In return, she gives him, or lends him, I guess, a copy of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And because she buys 2 phones from him, he sort of he takes it out of politeness and promptly forgets about the book until he gets an overdue note from the librarian that the book is 1 day overdue. He's got to turn it back in. He goes up to the library tries to explain that he can't really find the book. He's lost the book. Would they take a fine? And the librarian's like, no, we do not take fines. We do not take replacements. There's just that one copy on God's green earth. And I mean, things fall apart. It's a popular book, right? And he's like, what do you mean there's just one copy? Frustrated, he skips town. He moves to another place because he's a traveling salesman, to sell more rotary phones. On getting to the motel, he finds a note from the librarian waiting for him at the center of his bed, threatening him to return immediately with the book or there will be dire consequences. He's worried, of course, but he doesn't really think much of it. He moves to another town. On the train, as he boards the train into his compartment, he finds yet another note from the librarian threatening him about this book he refused to return and all the bad things she's going to do to him. So that's where we pick up quick. One day mopped his face as he inspected the watery contents of his bowel movement. That was the third time he had hit the toilet in 12 hours. His stomach was in knots, and what was worse, he could not seem to hold down food. It always came up, either from his mouth or his ass. The half-eaten remains of his dinner lying scattered on the table in his compartment was most likely remain half-eaten. Something fell out his pocket as he yanked up his trousers. The librarian's note, crumpled to a ball. Barely had 5 minutes passed than one day put it out of his mind. It was what he always did when faced with an unsolvable problem. Did he really want to think about how the librarian knew where to send her notes? Did he really want to consider how this note came to be in his compartment? Did he really want to think about those threats, both veiled and blatant? No. From his personal experience, problems had a way of solving themselves or slinking away if he paid them no mind. So, one day crumpled the notes once more, then chucked it into the toilet bowl, congratulating himself on a job well done. The librarian was waiting for him in his compartment. What? One day began, stunned. She sat on the other side of the table, dressed in the same fuchsia pink and black polka dot gown she had been wearing the first and last time he had seen her. Her hair, pulled back in a harsh bun, stretched her unibrow halfway across her forehead, giving her a perpetual startled look. It did not help that she was smiling. "What are you?" one day spluttered. "How did you find you?" she asked sweetly. Please, please, as though it was a dumb question and the answer was obvious. "Have you been following me?" "No," she said. "I tried to be civil. I wrote you letters, but of course you've ignored every one of them." Her black eyes bored into his. "In some cases, you even went as far as to show your contempt for me." One day felt an anvil drop into the pit of his belly. She knew. Somehow she knew that he had flushed her notes down with his shit. Look, he began. "Do you mind if I eat?" she asked. And without waiting for him, she reached beneath the table and produced a rusted brass food flask. One day watched, stupefied, as she carefully laid a napkin across her lap and tucked a bright pink bib into her neckline. Then she helped herself to one day's cutleries, grimy from fish oil and watery potato soup. Finally, she uncorked her food flask. From this distance, one day could not see what was in it, but a decidedly foul and rancid smell filled the stuffy air of his compartment. The librarian stabbed into the flask, twisted the fork. There was an awful squeal, followed by the sound of bone breaking and liquid slushing. Then popped a muddled piece of something into her mouth. She said, smacking her lips. "That's better, much better. I am so famished." But that's to be expected, especially when I had to bring the library with me. One day finally broke out of his stupor. Bring the library? Yes, the library. Dragged it over the hills and the mountains and across the blasted savannah I did. And she pointed the fork at him, jabbing at the air with each word. All because of you. One day looked at her for one long moment, then slowly began to chuckle. A hysterical sound which gradually morphed into spasmic snorts of laughter. You're mad, he gasped, wiping at his teary eyes. Very mad. I don't know how you got here or how you even knew where to find me, but I'm calling the... He saw it then, through the grimy window of his compartment. The train had taken one of its customary stops as they waited to switch onto another track, and one day had seized the opportunity to use the toilet. As he moved his bowels, he had had plenty of time to contemplate the barren savanna countryside and wonder at the scanty trees of the wilderness. What he hadn't seen, what he was sure hadn't been there, was the library. Now, though, the two-story library with the peeling yellow paint from Ibadan stood beyond the tracks. Beneath the milky disk of a full moon, it looked like an eerie, grotesque thing leaning with malicious intent towards the train. Wow. One day began, but the words melted in his mouth in a bitter taste of fear. The strength bled from one day's knees and he collapsed into the chair. The librarian gave him a wide, wide smile. This problem, it seemed, was not going away. It was a problem of a different kind, one which sent cold hands clawing down his back. One day turned to look at her smiling black eyes, at her too wide mouth chomping, chomping, chomping. What are you? That's unimportant now, she said. I'm here to talk about you and your debt to me. The book, he gulped. I told you I can't find it. Too bad, she said, chomping mechanically on whatever it was she was eating. I really hope, for your sake, that you do. She belched, then dabbed dutifully at her lips. Excuse me. One day looked down at the knife on the table and wondered how quickly he would have to move to stab it through her slender neck. The librarian's smile widened, almost as if she had read his thoughts. One day did not doubt that she had. As you can see, I've brought the library for your convenience, she continued. Isn't that very kind of me? All you need do, if you find the book, is walk up to the library and return it, and receive your punishment, of course, for all the trouble you've caused me. It will be terrible. She leaned in over her foot flask. But I assure you, it will be nothing compared to what will happen to you if you don't return that book. One day understood at last that he was in trouble. He began to sob. She smiled wider, her teeth a little too many, the points a little too sharp. Come now, Mr. Badmus, are you crying? That is unbecoming. Strings of snot and spit ran down his chin. Please, he blubbered. Please, I would do anything. Please. You have exactly 24 hours. And then she was gone. One moment, she sat before him, smiling at him, and the next, the chair was empty. The brass flask, the only sign she had ever been there. One day, still sobbing, hoisted his ample form out of the chair and peered into the flask, where he saw several scaly creatures floating in a thick, fetid soup of decay. Lizards. She had been eating lizards. I'll stop here.
She was so just matter of fact in her terrifyingness. Like, I felt like that was a full immersive experience.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll say the chat backstage here has been going wild, inventing new literary genres inspired by your story.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Trend starter over here.
It's like
Love
ripples,
it.
another type of circle. And speaking of ripples, what has rippled down to our audience in terms of themes?
We had some love for the dread theme a couple months ago.
That tracks.
Yeah. I love dread personally. You can tell from my my list at ECW Press. Well,
that is so we've started right back. We've finished where we started tonight. Thrilled to bring fiction and camaraderie right here on YouTube. And I guess that's the thing about circles, is you end up where you started, but you're not quite the same.
If we could have everybody pop up to say goodbye, that would be awesome. But until next time, everybody out there, please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter for occasional updates, and please subscribe to this YouTube page. If you like to track adventures, you can put a stay-in get together on the third Wednesday of every month for the next 2 months at 7 Eastern Time. We'd like to thank the Ontario Arts Council for their funding assistance.
And as we close out tonight, we'd also like to thank our fantastic readers and artists, our composer Alex White, our friends, families, loved ones, and you. Thank you for being in our circle. We will see you next on October 18th, right here on YouTube.